Okay, there's Kris Brown, someone who I've grown to admire a great deal. Super smart, powerful, influential, and I'm happy to have you joining me. Is that okay? Can I call you powerful, Kris?
Absolutely. I'm not going to stop you from calling me
Is
powerful,
that
Pete.
is that an insult? They're seeking power. The Brady organization. I don't know. The it's always harder to make the argument that you have to make each and every day because the other side, the gun folks, if you will, they're constantly fear mongering, including, and I just wanted to get your take on this, the idea that more guns makes everybody safer. That is such
Yeah.
a hard thing. What do you how do you generally respond to that?
Well, we do have more guns than any other industrialized country on the planet, and we have a lot more death and injury than any other industrialized country on the planet. So I like to exist in a world of facts. Maybe that makes me a little unusual these days, not
Mm.
hyperbole, and not lies. And the idea that more guns make us safer is absolutely manifestly disproven by the fact that we have more guns than any other country and we have way more death and injury from guns than any other country.
Okay, so let me talk with you about there's a bunch of things I wanted to get to surrounding guns, gun violence, gun safety efforts. But of course, initially, I think I reached out to you because I wanted to talk with you about the arguments heard at the Supreme Court last Thursday. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus V. Bruin is the case that was heard. Your organization and others organized around that. You were outside the Supreme Court with a whole bunch of influential folks, including New York Attorney General Letitia James, right, who's now running for governor, and so many others. What were you trying to accomplish and respond to with that argument last Thursday?
Well, it's a really important case before the Supreme Court. So we were trying to accomplish a few different things. One is really raise attention to the fact that the stakes around this case are really, really high for average everyday Americans in terms of how we live our lives and where and how we feel safe in this country. And the reason for that, Pete, is because we haven't had a gun rights case before the Supreme Court since the Heller decision more than a decade ago. And that decision basically held for the first time two things. One, that the right to own a gun is an individual, not a collective right. And the court basically detached it from any notion that it has something to do with a well regulated militia. What they found in that case is that an individual has a right to have a gun in their home for self protection. That Heller decision has sat as the law of the land for over a decade.
Yeah.
What it didn't decide, what it didn't hold, is that transmuted to carrying a gun in public. States across this country, including New York, require a license to carry a gun in public and require good cause to carry it if the reason is for self protection. And that's what it is at issue in this case, whether New York's law that they've had for a century will stand or whether it will be reversed by this court.
And you mentioned the Heller law over a decade. I think that was 2008, and that decision was the first decision in like 200 years on guns. That gets so lost. I Every time we talk about guns and a law, I feel like, Kris, that has to be mentioned. And then the other detail of that, I always forget what my friend Professor Eric Siegel mentions, but he says something with passion. Even Scalia said then that this doesn't mean, and I forget the point, but it's something about personal, I think, carry. But it is such a consequential and very important decision. What will, if this decision comes down, I guess in June, what do you anticipate it meaning?
Well,
I mean, more guns on the streets, right? Isn't that the worst case?
yes, that is exactly what it will mean. Because right now, New York has a system, and so do 8 other states. About a quarter of the United States population right now lives in a state like New York, where you have to have a permit to carry a gun. into public places. And if the Supreme Court strikes down that law, in effect, they will be striking down, unless they really limit their ruling, they will be striking down all of those other state laws. And I think the most alarming aspect of this was really demonstrated in the questions that were asked by some of the justices.
Yeah, you do a great job analyzing this legal stuff because you are, in fact, a lawyer, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I
Yes.
loved I mean, I didn't realize that I could maybe talk to you about this, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to give you
No.
credibility on the fact that you really do understand, from a legal
Yeah.
standpoint, legal scholar standpoint even, this. So go ahead. Yeah, what did you hear during the argument from your legal ears?
Well, a couple of different things that were really alarming, not surprising, but having it stated when the stakes are so high still causes great anxiety because of the stakes that are really at issue here. One line of questioning by Alito was along the lines of, are you telling me, and this was to the Solicitor General of New York, who was arguing on behalf of the permitting system at issue here, are you telling me that someone who fears for their own safety, who may be working a night shift, can't get a permit to ride on the subways of New York? And the underlying premise of that question was really the idea that Alito clearly thinks that individuals should be able, who have any kind of safety concern for themselves, they don't have to state what it is, it doesn't have to be an objective one, should be able to carry a gun anywhere at any time for any reason. And the real problem I have with that is the history of our entire country in which such activity was not allowed and was not consistent with the Second Amendment. So, from a legal standpoint, I have an issue with it. From a personal standpoint, leading Brady, I have a big issue with it for this reason. Jim Brady was President Ronald Reagan's press secretary. The president was shot, Brady was shot, a lot of other Secret Service agents were shot.
Yeah.
He was surrounded with the quote unquote good guys with guns, and he was still shot. Police get their intended target, they shoot their intended target about 50% of the time or less. Let's not think, and I don't think, that anyone would feel safer knowing that their random stranger next to them who has good intentions has a gun. That's not the world in which any of us want to live. It's not the world of our founding. And such a ruling overturning permitting systems absolutely means more people will carry guns anywhere at any time.
I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but where are police departments and unions generally on a lot of these gun issues? Because, you just described a scenario, and there was recently one that actually happened where a shooting occurs. There's a bad guy shooting people, and then a good guy. This is hard to narrate. Takes out his gun and he starts shooting at the bad guy, and then the cops show up, and they don't know because the good guys and bad guys aren't wearing good guy bad guy uniforms. And so, and by the way, sometimes the cops assume who the bad guy is because of how they might even look, I suppose. So I'm just wondering how police departments and police officers generally think about the fact that everybody could just be shooting at each other when they show up at the shooting and they have no idea what's going on.
They're very, very nervous about that. It causes great consternation. And in fact, you raise a really good point. I'll give an example for you. Remember the horrible shooting that happened in El Paso in a Walmart where individuals were targeted based on their ethnicity. It's very clear.
Right.
That shooting, many people in that Walmart had guns on their person. The reason none of them pulled those guns based on um, interviews that were conducted on the site is they didn't want to be mistaken for the bad guy. Police can't come in and, as you're saying, Pete, we don't have tattooed or in blaze orange good guy or bad guy. That's not how the world works. That's not how any of us experience the reality. Unfortunately, in way too many circumstances, individuals who are innocent bystanders get shot because they are perceived as the person who is potentially the shooter. And it's much more likely that that happens if they're wielding a weapon. And it happens often.
All right. Well, I have a lot of other questions, but I know I told you 15 minutes, and I got to get to a couple of really at least one other important issue, which is the Biden administration announced suicide prevention plan focusing on gun safety. I'm a little confused with how this plays out for the general population in terms of public policy and how it relates to the veterans community, because I know the VA is involved, and I've talked often here about the issue of veteran suicide. But again, these things, the other last thing, if we have time, I want to talk about is the filibuster. These things are hard to do from the executive branch. It's a great idea. It's a great announcement. But what, how serious of an impact can this make? What was announced, and where are you guys on it?
We're hugely supportive. We worked with the White House to get this announcement done and are really, really proud of it because
Great.
we know that about 20 vets a day, on average, are ending their life by suicide. The vast majority are with firearms. And that's not to mention the other kinds of family fire that happen because of unsecured guns in homes. 8 kids a day are killed or injured right now with guns in the homes that are not safely secured. The role of the government here, I think, can be really, really important as an information source. Look, the National Rifle Association was started in more than a century ago, ostensibly to focus on firearm safety. They don't talk about that. And the problem with that is that a lot of newer firearm owners are reacting with often with fear against the backdrop of COVID, buying guns and not buying safes, not safely storing those guns. And safe storage of firearms, if individuals choose to bring them in their home, is the number one way to end unintentional injury of kids in the home with guns and to really reduce suicide risk with guns, because suicide is typically a rash decision. If you look at the history around suicide and look at the literature, which Brady has, because we have an entire suicide prevention campaign, and Family Fire is focused on this. Typically, any impediment, any barrier that you can put in place that causes the person who is typically in a very, very bleak situation in that moment
Yeah.
to get them to internalize what they're doing, that can be a life-saving moment. All of the data shows this. So what the administration is doing is encouraging all of the federal agencies, agencies like the CDC, the VA, NIH, to put money behind educational campaigns to educate people about the importance of safe storage and require federal firearms licensees to educate their clients, the people buying the guns, about why safe storage is so important. The government hasn't done this before in this way. So I think it's a really, really important thing for the Biden administration to be taking on.
That's excellent, and great work to you and your colleagues for getting it done.
Thank
Now,
you.
just finally, the filibuster. What do you want? What legislation would you like to see passed, and what would getting rid of the filibuster do? And how likely do you think it is for your legislation, much less voting rights or anything else?
Well, the filibuster is killing us,
Yep.
literally killing us. And
Yep.
the bill that I really want to see get through, well, there are many that would get through if the filibuster ended, but one of them is H.R. 8. That's a bill to expand the Brady Law that this organization was founded because Jim and Sarah passed. Right now, federally licensed firearms dealers have to conduct a background checks. It's pretty simple. Problem is, that sales on the internet by private individuals and sales at gun shows aren't technically subject to the law. So this is a very straightforward expansion supported by 90% of Americans. 90% of Americans and 100 people in the United States Senate are holding that up right now. And that's not right. That's not democratic. That's not fair. And just to explain that for a second, the filibuster requires that you get 60 votes in the United States Senate before you can move forward with finalizing a debate. So even though the Brady bill expansion that I just referenced, that would get a simple majority in the Senate. It would pass. If it was on the floor tomorrow, we would get the votes for that to become law. But because of the filibuster, just like voting rights and a number of really important issues, it actually requires 60 votes to be able to get to the 50. And that's why the filibuster, which is an arcane rule,
Yeah.
just has to go.
And just a rule is not in the Constitution.
No.
Well, do you talk to the folks in the Senate Majority Leader and others trying to lobby them to get this done?
Yes, we do. We actually have a whole campaign that we put forward because Brady is an organization that has many, many survivors in our leadership. That's our history. That's our heritage. Survivors of gun violence who've lost their mothers, their children, their fathers. A video asking, begging the Senate and the American people to lift their voices on this. We really need to. And we've heard Joe Biden in recent weeks talking about this too. The filibuster is going to come to an end. The issue is whether it comes to an end fast enough and quickly enough for this agenda to move forward. And we think if it doesn't, we will lose 100 more people tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And a Brady law expansion will save lives. It's already stopped more than 4 million sales of guns to prohibited purchasers, but 25% of sales happening today are happening with no background check at all.
Right.
And that puts everyone at risk. So we are pushing really hard and will continue to do so because our issue and what Americans want is being held up because of this arcane rule.
And if you like this interview and what Kris and her organization are doing, you should go to bradyunited.org right now and donate. Or what else can people do?
Absolutely. Time, talent, and treasure is what we say, Pete. So you can volunteer. We have chapters all across the country for younger folks. We have an amazing group of young people called Team Enough, very focused on this issue, lifting their voices. You can get involved. You can communicate through us to your senators, to your elected officials, and you can donate.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's so great to talk to you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it too. Thanks so much.